Hello, everyone. My name is Jason George, and welcome to this session. This session is called Personal Stories of Gun Violence. It's not what you'd expect. And I have some fantastic people that I'll be moderating your panel today. And I have Fred Guttenberg and Taylor Schumann with me today. So I will let them largely introduce themselves. I do want to mention that they've each put a lot of their thoughts into books that you can get or can get soon. Fred's is actually called Find the Helpers, What 9/11 in Parkland Taught Me About Recovery, Purpose, and Hope. And Taylor's is called When Thoughts and Prayers Aren't Enough, A Shooting Survivor's Journey into the Realities of Gun Violence. And so, like I said, the panel is called Personal Stories of Gun Violence, and that's actually partially the reason why I'm here. I mean, number one, I live in America, 103 shootings a day. And I think anyone who's not concerned about this issue is not paying attention. But I've also had gun violence touch my life. My cousin Daryl Whitman was murdered by a gun. They never caught the shooter. I've had family members who were threatened by a spouse and family member with abusive spouse with a family member on the lawn of their, police came the entire 9 yards, exactly the worst case scenario you can expect. And then we also, and I guess we'll find this under the not what you expect, we have a close family friend who murdered the mother of his child and the man she was with in a fit of rage, and would give anything to have that 30 seconds of decision or lack of decision making back. I come from Virginia. I'm fond of saying it's not a red state or a blue state. It's a purple state. I believe that this issue of gun violence and gun safety is a purple issue. It's not a partisan issue, or it shouldn't be anymore. All the numbers say, which is why we're called the 97%. And the people that I have in my life being on all sides of the issue, including people who have committed gun violence, it's given me a lot of different perspectives. But I really would love to hear from Fred and Taylor today. So Fred, Taylor, please take a moment. Fred, I'll ask you first. For anyone who doesn't already know you, let us know what brought you into to be an activist in the issue of gun safety.
Yeah. So February 14th, 2018, I had the most normal start to my very normal, typical life. I got up, the dogs were being, harassing us and needing to be taken care of. My kids were getting ready for school. It was a normal day. It was also Valentine's Day. And I had a whole plan that night to really introduce my kids to the romance of Valentine's Day now that they were teenagers. I was rushing my kids out the door. That's what I remember about the morning, because I wanted to get busy putting my plan into place. And I was rushing them out the door, telling them, you got to go, you're going to be late, which, by the way, was nothing new. It was a normal day. They were two siblings. They were running late, blaming each other. Just get them out the door. And I didn't say, I love you, as the last words when I was rushing them out the door. The day continued like a normal day, the normal texting back and forth while they were in school, until just after 2 o'clock when my son called me. My son is a bit of a jokester. And he said, Dad. And I said, what? He goes, there's a shooting at my school. And I said, what are you talking about? I actually didn't take him seriously at first, until he said, and I can't find Jamie, because he watched after his sister like a hawk. And he would never mess around with her well-being. I said, where are you? And he said, well, I'm running, but I need to go find Jamie. I said, no, you keep running. You got to get off that campus. And as he's talking to me on the phone, he's telling me he hears more shots. Those were the killer now on the 3rd floor. Those were the shots that were killing his sister, my daughter. That is what brought me to this world I find myself in now. 4 months before my daughter was killed, my brother died of cancer related to his service in 9/11. My brother ran the triage for the World Trade Center. And so I've had experience with 2 American tragedies, 9/11 and the Parkland shooting. and how this country responded so differently to both. I am someone who has one goal in mind. I want to save lives from gun violence. I want to reduce the instances of gun violence. And I want to be clear, nowhere am I saying I want to go take everybody's guns away. That's not the world we live in. There's already 400 million weapons out there, but we can do more. We can be better than this. We can save lives. We can prevent things from happening. You use the example of your family friend. Now, I don't know the circumstances, but that one example gets to why background checks matter, waiting periods matter, because you get through some of this emotional stuff and then people get a chance to settle down. Red flag laws matter. All these things will save lives. And I'm glad you shared that personal story because it really gets to the point of how much work we have to do and why people like Taylor and I devote our lives to this now.
I mean, I didn't know we've known each other for a little bit now, but I didn't know the 9/11 connection. I'm learning new things about you. Taylor, share with us how you came into this world.
Yeah. So I'm Taylor, and back in April of 2013, April 12th, I was working at a community college in Southwest Virginia. And like Fred said, normal day, all the normal things about rushing off to work. I went in, and my coworker decided to take her little 15-minute break. And I was just hanging out at the front desk, and all of a sudden I saw my boss kind of stand up and start walking backwards, and she was screaming. And I turned around to see a shotgun pointed about a foot away from my face. And thankfully, the shooter had a lot of trouble getting the safety off the gun. He had actually tried to fire at me from behind before I could see him, but he couldn't get the safety off the gun. He ran down the hall after some people, and thankfully that gave me some time to duck underneath my desk and then make my way into a supply closet behind my desk. He shot through the door, and the bullet went through the door and went through my hand. It sent shards of wood and shrapnel kind of into my chest and into my eyes, so I couldn't see out of one of my eyes. Thankfully, after about 5 minutes, he had only been able to shoot one other girl, a student, and she also survived. He had gone down the hallways, banging on doors, telling people that he was hurt or needed help. And thankfully, no one let him in, and he wasn't able to hurt anyone else. And actually, a off-duty security guard heard about the shooting over his police scanner. He was out celebrating his anniversary with his wife, and he just drove to the school and came inside and was able to get the shooter to surrender and set down his gun. And he's the one who I heard yelling, "It's okay, you can come out." And I could hear him talking, and I knew it was okay. And then I had survived. And after that, I had 4 surgeries, about a year of therapy. I was able to regain about 20% use of my hand. So I have a good bit of physical disability left over. And then kind of the standard stuff that comes with these events, the PTSD and the anxiety and some depression and things like that, I still work through on a daily basis. I spent a couple years after that kind of, processing my beliefs about guns and what I'd always thought about guns and about gun safety and gun reform, and kind of learned everything I could and, learned the facts and tried to piece things together for myself. And, the craziest thing, the shootings just kept happening, just because it happened to me, it just kept happening. And it seemed so unbearable to me, unfathomable that we would just let these things keep happening. And it really just pushed me to kind of confront things that I'd always believed, because I'd always believed them, and push to see a better way forward. And yeah, that's how I ended up here.
No, that's an amazing story. And you hit on exactly where I wanted to go next in the conversation, which is, what did you think in terms of gun safety, gun violence before your incident, and where are you now? How did it change your views? I mean, I know because the incidents in my family's life happened. Most of them happened. The incident with a family member and the abusive spouse happened. I have no memory. I know the story, but I can see the impact of that on those family members decades later. Mm-hmm. The one to the family friend happened when I was an adult, and my cousin happened roughly when I was around in my late teens, early 20s. We were roughly around the same age, and so it wasn't a specific moment for me. It was a kind of, whereas for each of you, you were hit with this situation, quite literally. But I'm interested to hear, because again, part of the title of this session is "It's Not What You'd Expect." So I'm wondering what your views were prior to that moment in your life and where they are now. Mm-hmm. Taylor, you were just starting there.
Yeah. So before I was wounded, I was very pro-gun, very pro-Second Amendment. I didn't really see how gun laws could help reduce gun violence. I viewed them as an infringement on the Second Amendment, an infringement on, our rights to bear arms. And it's interesting because, I grew up about 30 minutes away from Virginia Tech. I went to Virginia Tech, so did my husband. So, I dealt in close proximity to gun violence before, but it still seemed something so far removed from me. And after I was wounded, I didn't change my mind instantly. I think a lot of people think that to be the case with most shooting survivors. It didn't flip a switch in me and boom, I was, pro-gun reform. It took a long time for me to see these connections between guns and rates of gun violence, and see connections between states with stronger gun laws and reduced rates of gun violence, and starting to understand the types of gun violence that are more prevalent than school shootings or mass shootings, things like firearm suicide and everyday gun violence that is affecting our marginalized, low-income, underserved communities, things that I never had to see before because that wasn't part of my day-to-day life. And so kind of taking a step back and seeing the suffering that I'd been through, and then how our gun laws can affect rates of gun violence, that really helped shape how I changed my mind. And so now I'm very pro gun safety, very pro gun reform laws, all the things, Fred kind of talked about too, things like safe storage and waiting periods and all that kind of stuff, I think is really important.
Well, you just hit a very important point. Then Fred, I want to come to you because that's a little bit of new information to me, because we always think of it as an emotional issue. Mm-hmm. You think that the decision to become an advocate, an activist for gun safety is driven out of emotion. Mm-hmm. And it's funny because for me, it really wasn't. And I'm really surprised to hear that for you, it wasn't the emotional decision. It was about you learning more. That moment made you start doing research.
Yeah.
And then the facts and information brought you to the realization. Was that accurate?
Absolutely. And that was an intentional choice on my part, because I could tell in myself I was changing and then my views were changing, but it was really important to me to have knowledge and time to work through those things and feel like I knew what I was talking about. before I started being vocal about that in public. That was really important to me. And for the record, I think it's perfectly fine if it is an immediate emotional switch, because our emotions are good and they tell us, what's going on and help us, move forward in things. So I'm not at all saying that's bad, but for me, it was really important that I knew what I was talking about and I knew what I believed and why, because it was such a new area for me, I guess.
Right. And I agree with you. I'm not saying that at all. I think that the emotion of the moment makes you start to say, what could have been done differently to make sure that moment didn't happen?
Yeah. Yeah. And it doesn't happen for other people.
Right. And then I think facts fill in the blanks. Fred, where were you before Parkland, and where are you now?
So before I actually answer that, I just want to say something to Taylor. Because when you described what you went through, I talk all the time about imagining what my daughter went through when she knew there was an active shooter at her back. You knew. And I always talk about the fear and anxiety that she had to have had in that moment. And I will never have a fear and anxiety like what she had. Before we started this conversation, we were talking about nervousness. And I've lost this capacity for nervousness, fear, and anxiety because I'll never know what my daughter felt. Nothing I ever experienced will be as bad as what she felt or as what you felt, Taylor. Nothing. And so I appreciate you really sharing your story so deeply, because I can connect with that in ways that you can't imagine. I also really appreciate you talking about the reality of the ongoing health issues, because I talk now about gun violence all the time, not as a Second Amendment issue. It's not, okay? Doing something about it is, there's a gun lobby that has put out that big lie for a lot of years. It's not. It is a public health issue with ongoing, lasting consequences. Not everybody dies. I often talk about, because the bullet severed my daughter's spinal cord, and in a place where it stopped her heart immediately. I often talk about, what if it was in a different place and she was paralyzed instead? It is a public health issue. It is not a Second Amendment issue. That is a BS argument. It always was. So to answer your question about where I'm at now versus where I was, before Jamie was killed, I was kind of ambivalent, and I have such guilt over that. I didn't speak out about this because it wasn't my kid, and I'll never forgive myself for that. I will never forgive myself for not having had my voice in this before it was my kid. My father-in-law owns guns. My son goes shooting with my father-in-law. This is not and never was about me, how I feel about guns. It never was. However, I also, because of what happened and because of these amazing people I've met around the country like Taylor and others, have come to really understand and learn why gun violence happens, why the majority of gun owners actually agree with me, in spite of what a lobby says, and why we have the capability to do more than we ever have to save lives. We are failing citizens right now. People are voting. People are saying they want gun safety. That doesn't mean we should walk into people's homes and take their guns out and say, you can't have this and you can't have that. But it means we should put up roadblocks to do a better job of keeping weapons and ammunition out of the hands of those who intend harm to themselves or someone else. And we have failed to do that. And so that is not a Second Amendment issue. That is a public safety, public health issue. And so as a country, we need to address it that way.
100%. 100%. I often in conversations bring up two political points that for me are virtually undeniable. And with some of in fact, one is the Dickey Amendment, which for anyone who knows and anyone who's paying attention, was an amendment that Representative Dickey, actually, that is his name, put out there to prevent the government from doing any research whatsoever into gun violence. And through the CDC, because it is a public health and safety issue. And so by preventing the CDC from ever doing any research into it, it was preventing actually getting facts that the government, agreed upon facts, universally accepted facts that we can all then use to figure out what can we do. Which to me was just a ludicrous concept. When I first learned about it, I just thought, why would you? I know my body hurts, but I won't go to the doctor because I refuse to find out what it is that's causing this ailment. That didn't make sense to me. The second one for me that I bring up all the time is HJ Res 40, which Donald Trump signed, which repealed an Obama era executive order, which essentially was when a veteran becomes mentally ill enough that they are a danger to themselves, they'll have their checks sent to their designated person, a family member, or what have you. And it basically made an addendum that if you're deemed mentally ill to where you're not able to handle your own finances, maybe you're not mentally healthy enough to own a gun. And that seems logical to me. But behind closed doors, they signed it and repealed that back. And I remember being at a march for gun safety, and there was a Second Amendment advocate, so-called, because I don't think these things are diametrically opposed, but that's how he referred to himself. And when I pointed out that resolution to him, he actually stopped and got on his phone and went to look it up, because most people I know, look, I'm from a military town. I'm actually not far from you, Taylor. I grew up in Virginia Beach and went to UVA. Military town, guns, everybody I knew growing up dealt with guns if they didn't have one in their home because they were in the military. And my dad was military. My three best friends were military. I am a good shot, and I have an incredible love for veterans. And to hear that veterans who are more likely than the average person to commit suicide, and if they commit suicide, it will be with a gun, that they repealed a law trying to put some kind of a thumb in that dike to slow that down. That concept to me was, and I have yet to meet someone who is a so-called Second Amendment advocate who can explain to me why that makes sense.
Jason, it was one of the first things that he did as president was to repeal that.
The first
and
thing.
To really very early on send the message to the NRA and others that I'm here for you, whatever you need. We're going to keep chipping away at this, because it was always about gun sales, never about gun safety. Okay. And, going back to the Dickey Amendment thing for a minute, you can't solve a problem if you don't take the time to study and identify why you have a problem. And so that is what happened. They literally stopped studying. And the NRA that really was behind Dickey's push to do that. And by the way, he eventually flipped and said, I made a mistake here. I never should have done this.
Yes.
While they were behind that, they went ahead and started bringing in all these fake researchers to create research showing that guns solve all the problems. Okay. It wasn't that they were opposed to research. They were opposed to research that actually was going to be done in reputable, serious ways that might have said, maybe guns shouldn't be in everybody's hands. Maybe we ought to know more for the public good. And so you're absolutely correct. But by pointing it out, you're also highlighting the things we can do to fix it.
And so what are some of those things, Fred? Talk to me about where you're at right now. I mean, what are some of the things that have you optimistic about where we are in terms of the gun safety, gun violence conversation?
Well, listen, we have a president now who is diametrically opposed to the other president, who believes in the rights of gun owners, but also believes in the rights of people like my daughter to live out her life, or people like Taylor to be able to go out in a normal experience and not have to spend the rest of her life with injuries. And so he's taken some executive actions to deal with, number one, ghost guns, which are becoming a much more significant issue in our country, but also to deal with things like trafficking of weapons. You have 400 million weapons in this country right now. They're moving around. Nobody's paying attention. And that gets to the third thing that he did, which was nominating a full-time director of the ATF. At a time when gun sales and gun violence was surging in this country, we had an ATF that was being torn apart. You can't, it makes no sense to me that the agency of government intended to deal with these things was being ripped to shreds, but it was. And so the person who's been nominated, Dave Chipman, he's a gun owner. He's law enforcement. He gets all of this, but he also believes in gun safety. We also have a House that is ready to pass legislation. We have a roadblock in the Senate. I'm optimistic we're going to break through that roadblock this year.
That's fantastic. Taylor, where are you optimistic? What are you looking? What do you see on the horizon as something that might move the needle in terms of gun safety and reducing gun violence?
Yeah, I'm definitely optimistic. When people ask me that, I usually say I have to be optimistic, because how else do we keep going if we don't have hope that things might change? And I've been really encouraged by these executive orders. These are things that needed to be done decades ago. I see a really strong push with people my age, the generations kind of coming up behind me, that are just really concerned with the well-being of humans, and are really concerned for what Fred is talking about, that this is a public health crisis. It's less about the guns and more about what the guns are doing to us as people, and the effects that are rippling out, causing generational trauma that we cannot even quantify now. I would love to see us be able to kind of break through some of this extreme rhetoric that I think really divides us kind of right off the bat and makes it really hard to even have conversations with one another, because Republicans are constantly being fed messages by people in the NRA, people like the NRA, they're lobbyists saying we have to have more guns. More guns are the answer. You will need a gun for self-defense, not you might need a gun for self-defense. Saying, that Democrats are going to beat down your door and take your guns, that it's a slippery slope, that we want to ban all guns. And then, people on a more progressive liberal side, we're saying things, like Republicans don't care about gun violence and they don't want to save lives and they don't care about lives. They only care about guns. Neither of these things are really helpful if we're going to work together and find those people that really do care about saving lives. And then the people that do care about someone's right to own a gun, right to have, shooting as a hobby or to go hunting. Most of us are those people, right? Most of us are middle ground people. But it's these people on the extremes that are very, very loud. So of course it's hard to kind of come to the table together when we're assuming the worst about one another. As members of this organization, 97%, we believe that most people do see a need for gun safety measures and these things that we can all agree with. So I think that I would love to just see us be able to kind of break down some of these false messages that are getting out there, the fake news, if you will. I think that's doing more damage to this conversation than anything else I can think of, because these things just aren't true. And most of them are built on false research that was done in the 90s, all these kinds of things that, have since been discredited. I would love to see that. I would love to see, I'm encouraged by states that are passing laws. We kind of talked about that at the beginning. A lot of gun safety is being done at a state level, not a federal level. And that's why I can feel like not much is getting done, because you might not hear about what's being done in the state, that you don't live in. But, we've got states like Virginia that are passing awesome gun safety measures, states that are expanding red flag laws and background checks, states that are, passing their own assault weapons bans, places like New Jersey. And, I'd love to see more states take up safe storage laws that could help with, child unintentional shootings and firearm suicides. And, we know most school shooters get their guns from their home or a family member's home or someone that they know. And yeah, I'd love to see people talk a little more about what it means to be a responsible gun owner in America, because it's not leaving your gun out where a kid can get it. And it's not leaving it in an unlocked car where we have so many guns stolen from. It's not these things. And so if we're going to use that as a standard, this American responsible gun owner, we have to decide what the requirements are to call someone a responsible gun owner. And I think that even most of those people would agree that that these things are wise to do.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
You mentioned slippery slope.
Yeah.
The slippery slope argument has been used now for decades to prevent not only any gun safety from happening, but actually to cause loosening of gun laws in this country. So this idea that we'll go on a slippery slope, we've been on the slippery slope. We've been on a slippery slope to where we are today with these laws being loosened and loosened and loosened. And it's why we have the problems that we do. Regarding politicians, what is really interesting, you look across states, you can look at Governor John Kasich of Ohio, believed in gun safety. He brought me there to testify. Larry Hogan in Maryland, Charlie Baker in Massachusetts. Republicans in states and cities are doing something about gun violence. The issue is in Washington, D.C. They are locked down, and it is partisan. They are not going to move even a little bit. And they do use the extreme language of the gun lobby. And so we have to call them out and make sure we differentiate them, because the Republicans in Washington, D.C., they are the extremists on this issue, and we can't let them get away with it.
Yeah. And it amazes me because I feel like the emperor has no clothes. I mean, the NRA's had its issues of late in so many ways. But Taylor, everything you were talking about, the NRA was developed originally for gun safety. Learn how to use your gun properly, learn best etiquette, et cetera, and it's not been that for some time now.
Yeah, the NRA used to be a strong proponent. They would lobby Congress and the government for gun safety laws. The big law, crime law in the 60s, the NRA, they were behind all these gun safety measures. They wanted to teach people how to be wise with their weapons and understand the gravity of what that meant to be a gun owner. And so, you can trace this shift in what they've become, and it's just not what it used to be. And it's becoming quite obvious, if you're willing to see it, that their goal here is to make money, spend money, getting politicians into office, and then using those politicians to loosen gun laws or keep any gun safety measure from passing. They were behind all the stuff with the ATF. We talk about weakening their ability to regulate and enforce the gun laws in this country, making it so that the ATF can only keep paper records and they can't keep certain records for longer than 24 hours, making it impossible for them to run, background checks within that 3-day period. So I think we need to call it what it is, and see this organization for what it is, what they're doing.
Yeah, the storage facility for all those paper records, by the way, is a massive set of cargo holds that it looks like. It's
collapsing under the weight of all the papers because they haven't digitized.
Yeah.
Right. They haven't digitized it. And there's like one gentleman who knows what stack of papers that is. It's it's been designed to collapse under its own weight. And what's interesting to me, and this is what I want to ask next, is when you really break it down and you break out the facts, and as we talked about, it's Washington, D.C., where it's extremely partisan. And 97% of the rest of us are actually more open to having a real conversation. I know that I've personally, I use the same example every time, a friend who's a older gentleman, gun collector, and over a beer, he completely will acknowledge that it's ridiculous that he can plunk down his license, get a 6-pack of beer and a gun, and roll out. He lives in South Carolina. He will completely acknowledge most of the things I bring up. That's probably a good idea. That's probably a good idea. And then the time that we had this particular conversation, 2 weeks later, Barack Obama had his gun summit, the town hall on guns. And I sat in the same room with the same man who just a few days before was very reasonable. And he was armored up, staunch. They're coming to take our guns. And you could see the Kool-Aid was mainlined, and he was going all the way down he was drinking it all. He wasn't even drinking it. He was just taking it. He was mainlining it. So I'd love that you two are uniquely suited to break through people's assumptions because of your personal stories, where you come from, and where you personally are on the issues of gun safety. Help the rest of us, because I know what I do, the little bit of experience I have in my family. You both have very personal experience and still aren't trying to get rid of the Second Amendment, still aren't trying to take the guns. So how do you give the rest of us a little bit of, if you will, ammunition on how to talk to someone when they retreat to the corner and start to lock up because we're having a political conversation now, I have to disagree with you. Mm. How do I combat that?
You know, listen, your friend, I'm glad you mentioned him. I often think of Rick Scott, who was the governor of Florida when Jamie was killed. And immediately following that, worked with the families to, within 3 weeks, pass gun safety laws in Florida. Florida, a very conservative state. And we did it. And lives are being saved. Red flag laws, raised CH-21, and put in place a waiting period. Lives are being saved because of that. But he has since gone to Washington, D.C. He wants people to ever forget that he was a part of that. Okay, he doesn't talk about it. It doesn't want people to remember it. But here's the thing. There's not a single legal, lawful gun owner in the state of Florida who ever thinks about the gun safety laws that we passed, because they don't impact them. And I think that's what people need to understand. What I want to do, what Taylor wants to do. If you're a legal, lawful gun owner, honestly, this ain't about you. But this is about identifying those who we need to be protected from, or who need to be protected from themselves. So the way to talk to people, I do it like this. I ask people, I have 3 things that I just highlight, and I don't think anyone can disagree. And if we can agree on the goals, then let's talk about how we achieve the goals. And the 3 goals are, how do we reduce the gun violence death rate? How do we reduce the instances of gun violence? And how do we reduce the severity of gun violence injuries when they happen? Okay, I acknowledge gun violence is still going to happen because people are still going to have their guns. Work with me on doing that. And the majority of gun owners are as reasonable about the things that need to be done to achieve those 3 goals as I am. But when you start up by saying, I believe in gun safety, they're like, oh, you're a gun grabber. No, I want to do these 3 things. Work with me.
And you make there's a point that needs to be made there that there's a common retort is, and I'm paraphrasing it in my language so people can see how ridiculous it is, that because you can't do everything, you should do nothing. So that's not going to stop the gun violence. No, nothing will ever stop all gun violence. That's an impossibility because human beings are flawed. Yeah. But we can make it less than 103 a day. We can ratchet that number back. Taylor, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I really love what Fred said. I have long felt we have to be honest about that when we come into the conversation, that the goal isn't to end all gun violence. While that would be fabulous, that's not going to happen. That's not the goal. So we're not trying to take away all guns. What we're trying to do here is harm reduction, reduce suffering, do the things we can do. And you know what? That might mean that you have to compromise a little. You have to ask yourself, am I willing to compromise maybe owning a certain amount of ammunition or a certain amount of guns? If it means that less suffering happens and less lives are lost to gun violence, am I okay with that? Have I come to terms with that? Am I willing to do that? For me, I think it's really important when we come into these conversations about to assume the best about the other person, and they have to earn your thoughts about that, but to say, like, is both of our goal here to end or to reduce gun violence, to save lives? If we can agree on that, we can talk about the things like Fred was talking about. We can talk more rationally about the ways we want to do that. We might not agree on all the ways that those things should be done, but if we can remind each other we both want to see less suffering, less lives lost, we can move forward from that place, I think.
Yeah, that's the thing for me, is I just always start with, do you want people to die?
Yeah.
And I'm assuming the answer is no.
Yeah.
Then we have something we agree on, and we can move from there. Then then I say, welcome to the 97%.
Yeah. And what we're doing now is not working. Can we acknowledge that? It's not working. So maybe we could try something else, and it might not be perfect, but I mean, what do we have to lose? Like, we're already losing a lot. So
yeah, we're arguably at a greater point now. I mean, we were talking about it a little bit earlier, and Fred, you were saying, that, and we almost need to wrap up now, but that we are moving in the right direction, even though the laws haven't passed in DC yet. Mm-hmm. You were talking about it happening on the state level. So many people are more aware. Taylor, we were talking about the fact that the younger generation is actually motivated. It's actually, for lack of a better, it's cool to care about something, and that a lot of young folks care about gun violence. It's an issue that they have opinions on and aren't afraid to express. And so, Fred, just bring home in, what has changed since Parkland?
Yeah.
Where give me some, where were we? Where are we going?
Listen, states and cities are passing gun safety laws. The issue with that is you're only as safe as your closest border. Mm-hmm. I think the big thing that's changed, and Taylor mentioned it, it's the kids, their engagement, knowing they're going to be our future leaders. But it is the last two elections. In 2018 and 2020, those elections, gun safety was a dominant voting issue, and people voted for it. It is clear. Next year, we go into another election year. And I do hope that the majority of Americans come out and vote again. Because if the majority of Americans come out and vote again, we will be okay in the next election. Forget all the stuff that's happening in politics right now, trying to bring the vote down in the next election. If we show up, if we vote, we will again be voting for people who believe in gun safety. We will get this done, but we have to vote.
100%. We've got to show up. And so thank you both for being here. And the fact that all of you listening at home, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate you both.
You too, Fred. Thanks, Taylor.